before I start, I want to acknowledge where I got this information, not just because lots of people have helped, but also just to let you know it's really true. So this is a wonderful source in case you don't know. It was written in 1995 by William Offit. It's not just Bethesda, but it's Glen Echo. It's some of Chevy Chase. He got it by interviewing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. He came over and interviewed Joan and Helen Yazzie and me for the Somerset section. So I know the amount of work that went into this. And there aren't a lot of pictures, but there's a lot of really good text. So this is where I got the really early Bethesda history. The second piece is this booklet, which all of you got when you moved, or you may have gotten it other times. This was written for our Diamond Jubilee in 1981. This is 90% of Joan's work. She did an incredible job going through the town history, drawing this tracing of the original blueprints, just doing lots of things. So I want to acknowledge her also for what she did. And of course, that built on top of other people like Helen Yazzie and Dorothy O'Brien, who did the history back in the early 70s. And without all these people, we wouldn't have the history. And without all of you, I hope we will get more history because, as you can see, this is mainly old stuff. There's been a lot of new stuff that's happened, and I'll say a little bit more at the end. And I guess the other one thing, this book, some of you may have, this is more towards the later stuff than the early stuff. But the early stuff is in here also, and the pictures and the maps and so forth. Okay, I'm going to use my notes because I forget dates. But I want to start way back when. So long before Somerset was here. So if we looked at this area around 1800, what we would see would be large farms, 100 acres or more, all the way as far as Rockville in every direction. They originally were tobacco farms, and the port was Georgetown. So they went to Georgetown with their stuff. After a while, the land was completely worn out from tobacco, and they had wheat and corn and other things planted. Their main road came from Georgetown up and took the little jog that old Georgetown Road takes and went up to Rockville and maybe went beyond that. It was dirt. That was it. And that's how people got their stuff down to Georgetown. In 1818, there was a turnpike built. And this one had macadam on it. It actually went along the same route, except it went straight. So it went up what we call Rockville Pike today because it was a turnpike. So there was a reason to call it Rockville Pike. It was 20 feet wide. There was a toll booth, multiple toll booths all the way up to Rockville. There was one just south of the intersection of Old Georgetown and Rockville Pike today. That was it was the one near us. There were probably some further down. In 1873, a big thing happened, and that was the railroad came in. So the railroad that was built from Point of Rocks down to downtown Washington, that went through Kensington and Tacoma Park and those areas, suddenly allowed all of these suburbs to open up. And so we began to get lots of people that could get to town by the railroads. We, of course, didn't have very much here. And so if you look at the population, in 1878, Rockville had around 1,000 people. Bethesda had 20. 20 people in Bethesda. There was James Davidson, who Davidson Road up here. He was a doctor. There was Joseph Bradley. I guess Bradley Boulevard was named after him. He was a lawyer. There were a couple blacksmiths that had shops up at the corner of Old Georgetown and Rockville Pike. That was what Bethesda looked like in 1878. So now we're going to move just 10 years later. There was a trolley built from Georgetown to Tenleytown. 1888. In 1888, probably not by coincidence, the person who was the farmer on 211 acres here sold his land for $32,000 to Thomas Hyde. I want to show you what the boundaries kind of looked like. So you might not see this well, but so we have the Somerset we know here. But the boundaries went all the way down to Friendship Heights. They went all the way down to River Road. They went all the way down to the creek, or the railroad spur as we know it today, which didn't exist then. So that was the land that he sold for $32,000 in 1988. In 1888. Thank you, thank you, thank you. In 1890, the trolley track was extended all the way to Rockville, including past Somerset. By strange coincidence, in 1890, this property was resold to John Beale, who was one of the trolley's founders, for $72,000. So in 2 years, they doubled their money on this trolley land. So this kind of stuff that we see today has been around a very long time. At the same time, 1890, they sold to Wiley, Crampton, Salmon, Fuller, and Horton, our founders, 50 acres, which became Somerset Heights, for $19,000. So, in 1890...
What did that encompass at that time, Donna? How much of the...
I'll show you. In 1890, that encompassed basically this. Not this. This all belonged to Bergdahl. This all belonged to Bergdahl. But this was all that was owned. It went down probably, it shows on this map where the names are. It went down close to the creek, but probably not all the way to the creek. So, and then it stopped here. This was farmland here. Now, I thought if I can find it quickly, I will read a little bit. They did a very fancy brochure, of course, 1890, because they were going to make a lot of money, these people. The beautiful suburban property known as Somerset Heights is situated just outside the district line in Montgomery County and lies in the heart of that active real estate movement and march of improvement northwest of Washington. It is 400 feet above tidewater, absolutely free from malaria influence, and is located in the healthiest suburb in Washington. They also promised that they would provide sewage, they would provide bountiful water, and they would provide electric lights, which they were going to get from the trolley lines. There were then, part of what they decided to do is they all pledged to each other they were each build a house immediately in Somerset. So let me show you. These are the houses here. These are 4 of the houses that mostly exist. This one is the house on the corner of Dorset and Big Surrey. So it's right here. So this is Big Surrey, this is Little Surrey, and this they built right there. That was built by the Salmons. And Daniel Salmon, so that's 4728. He was the chief of the animal industry of the Department of Agriculture. He's also Salmonella, so that was named after him. The house was bought in 1902 by the Stolmans. So Stolman is the person who had the candy shop down in Georgetown that they then put in the Smithsonian. I don't know if it's still there, but it was there for a while. He also had a lot of children. Here's a picture of the Stolmans for their 50th anniversary. They had 9 children. And some of those Stolmans are the Stolman autos that you see over in Virginia and those people. So Stolman was a big country. And this is their house. It looks pretty much like it does today. If you go up there, it's kind of hard to see because of the way that we're seeing it here. But if you look at it carefully, you'll see it's very much the same house. The first house that was built was the Wiley house. Wiley was a chemist. He was the person who was the father of the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906. This is the revised version of his house. The original house is, well, this is the front, so this was what it looked like. It's had a lot added onto since. But we've also had some other people that lived here. The Ringlands lived here. They were here a very long time. Mr. Ringland was the first regional forester for the Southwest in 1905. And he came back, he went out there when he was in his 90s, and I can see him walking up Dorset Avenue now with an enormous hat of, that they had given him. He'd gone out there to see them, and they'd made a big fuss about it. And here was he with his hat and talking about his time. He also worked after World War I, and he's one of the persons who was the founder of CARE. So we had some neat people here. So if we go to this house doesn't exist anymore. This is the house that's on the corner of Little Surrey and Dorset. It's now replaced by 3 modern houses. It was a big, beautiful house, you can see, with all of this. It was torn down in '65. It was in very bad shape. This is the original Crampton house. So this is the person who was the mayor. Now this is the house at that intersection of Big Surrey and Dorset. So it's that funny house that's right here, kind of facing right down Surrey. It doesn't look at all like this today. It's the Gage house. It looks very different today. They've done a lot of work, it's been changed. We had an architect called Mr. Bean here that came through this town around in the 30s and destroyed a lot of stuff, and this is one of them. I mean, he didn't destroy it, he just turned it modern. Okay, we had one more house that doesn't exist anymore, and that was the DeSwayze house, which was, he took over from Horton. It was built on Essex, which is kind of fascinating because it was built right here. So this would be 4721. There's a house there now, it's an old Victorian, but it burned down right after it was built, and it was replaced by this house, which is there. This is the house that's now on sale there, the Victorian. So those were our founders. In nothing much happened. These houses were all built between 1891 and 1895. In 1899, they decided to divide the land up amongst them. They divided it into 96 building lots. This is basically the survey that was done in 1899. The original is in Jeffrey's office. This is a tracing that Joan did for our 75th birthday. You can see the original houses. So I'll talk a little about this map. This is the original. You can see what they thought that maybe one day they would get this and build there, but of course they didn't. You can see the people who were living here in 1906, because there are multiple layers to this map. One of them is the original survey, which you can see, which looks like the blueprint that's in Jeffrey's office. These orange lines, or sort of yellow lines, this is the sewer system. It went directly into the creek or into the cesspool. There was a cesspool at the bottom. The red lines are the water system, which went in 1902, and I'm going to talk about that separately. We had these houses here, this one, this one, this one, this one, and maybe one over here. I don't know when that was built. That was all that existed. They sold the lots, and some people individually bought them, but mainly they were bought up by speculators. So, like today, yeah. Some of them were individual, and I want to point to that. This is what I'm calling the Biggs house. It actually wasn't built by the Biggs, but they were one of the early owners of that. This was then the Vinton house. Today it is it is 4718. Yeah. It's their house. It was built in 1899. And behind it, this little house which is where I live, was the carriage house, which was actually a barn and a very primitive carriage house. So these were early houses. The house here that's labeled Carrigan, I don't know exactly when it was built, but it was built very early. It was built before 1900. There's another house here labeled Rice that was also built. This is where Donna Evers lived there. I don't know who lives there now. Stern, anyway. That house is also very early. But then there was basically, the land was basically sold to someone called Holliday, who was from New York. He bought 24 lots, and he started subdividing and building houses. We had a main builder here that was Mr. O and Mr. O's son. He not only built a large number of houses in Somerset, he built a large number in Friendship Heights. And he started to build along up here. First of all, you notice that these three little lots have, instead of 2 lots, they broke them up into 3. So he subdivided the 2 lots and proceeded to build cheap houses up here. He built houses here. These were all built right after 1900, and he built some along here. These 3, they sold for $2,700 for a 2-bedroom and $3,500 for a 3-bedroom. And these were thought to be very cheap. People really looked down on them because they had these tiny little lots. So when you walk up along here, I can give you the numbers of these, but you know where they are. They're right across from the school. Those are, they look alike. They were all built about the same time. And here is one of them. This is the Cooper house. The house isn't shown, but here are the Coopers. They're headed down Dorset Avenue. Dorset Avenue was just a meadow. There wasn't anything there. They're walking down, very elegant. Here's their children playing. Here is them feeding chickens in the side yard. This one is particularly interesting to me because it's showing this house up here. This is the original Sutcliffe Mansion, which is where the Foxes now live. This house burned down in 1909. If you notice, it's very near to what I'm calling the Vinton house or the Biggs house or whoever lives there now, whose name I have now forgotten again. They're very, almost twins, these 2 houses. They were built at the same time. But you can see it. You can also see there are almost no trees. This was just meadow. It was farmland. People just built right. There are no trees. And that's what it looked like. This one is another of the early ones. This is the Swaggart house. It's at 4727 Essex. It's the second one in. So it's the one that's just been remodeled and they added stuff in the back. It's not the first one, it's the second one. Here's a picture of the house as it looked back then. Again, no trees, just meadow, nothing. Here's some children and so forth. It's interesting, these are sisters, and the O sisters were here. There were lots and lots of family groups that came here related to each other. So this is one of the early houses. It's not clear. They were all built around the same time. This is some of the stuff that we need to actually research more. We need to dig into the records. Yeah, because when it was sold, when it was finished, I mean, all these things are hard to track. So at the same time, all of this was happening, of course, Friendship Heights was growing. Friendship Heights was just a bunch of houses, big houses down there. There weren't what we see today. There were no stores. The closest store was the Wilson Brother, which was the first store that opened. It opened in Bethesda in 1890. It became Community Hardware, and it's now the one that's preserved. So that's 1890. That was the only general store. People had to get on the trolley and go up there if they wanted anything, or else they had to go down to Georgetown. Okay, the water system. I said I'd say something about that. All right, so they promised people water. And of course, there wasn't any water. The people had to do their own wells. In 1902, Crampton formed a company, the Somerset Water Company. There were deep wells that were drilled down at 4824 Cumberland. That's the house that has huge trees there. And they were either there or in between those two lots. It's not clear. Then they ran a pipe up from there all the way up to the top of the hill where the Biggs house is. So right here, just about right here in front of that house, there was a wooden tower, water tower, with a windmill on top, a wind vane to turn this. And that was what brought the water up the hill. Now the water got up the hill on a pipe, and here's a picture showing the pipe. I think the dates aren't quite right, but I think that this is the pipe coming up Cumberland. It went all the way up to the top. There was, first of all, the windmill that drove it up there. Then there was eventually gasoline and then an electric motor. And the way they kept this thing filled is on the side of the water tank was a gauge. And then when it got low, then the people who lived across the street, whose name were Dudley, Dudley, they lived there. He was the one who was in charge of this. The children had to then go turn on the pipe so it would go up. They also had to take the ice out of the pipe in the wintertime because, of course, it froze coming up, and then people had no water. So that was the water. That was the promised water. It did happen. It cost $200 to hook up to it. It didn't say what happened to be done, how much you'd pay per month for this. Okay, so that was that. I want to say something about the trolley lines. So number 5 shows you some pictures. It shows you a picture of the oldest of the trolley houses, which is the one over there on the far left. This one. You notice it's kind of leaning this way. There were always things in the town minutes about the trolley house needs work. Here it is in 1920. It's been rebuilt. You can actually see the trolley going by. This is one of the trolleys. Now these trolleys that we came here, we were the end of a double line, which was really neat because the trolleys could come up here, they could turn around, and they could go back. Well, I don't think they probably turned around. They probably switched. There was probably a switch. But as you went north to Rockville, it was all single track. And so there were sidings along the way, and that they had to pull over. So Somerset was in a really neat location as respect to trolley lines. This, by the way, since I'm over here, this is a picture. So we're kind of looking where Tracy Truman's house would have been on Warwick, and we're looking at the path that the kids took walking down to Dorset Avenue. Nothing, no trees, just path. So that's where we were. So there was actually another trolley line, and in fact, in the advertisements, they claimed they had 2 trolley lines, and therefore they'd get wonderful service. This is the trolley line, and what it was, so in 1891, the Glen Echo line was built. This was a line that went from Chevy Chase Circle to Glen Echo, because Glen Echo was the amusement park. And this is where it went. It came basically down Oliver Street from the circle, and then it zipped along right here. If you go down to the creek, so you follow the path that goes in, and the place where you have to ford the creek, you'll see a hill up there. And it's an artificial hill. This is what was built for the crossing of that creek, and there was originally a bridge there. So you can see kind of the remains of this. It's all ivy covered now, but if you look there, you can also see where it was cut through where the creek is, and that's where there was originally a bridge. But I have to tell you, this wonderful trolley line was built in 1891. It was abandoned in 1900. So it ran for 9 years, and someone lost a lot of money on that one, I think. So those were our trolley lines.
I know why. Why wasn't it successful?
They just didn't make money. There was also another line, the line that was running in the early 60s or late 50s, it would have been the middle 50s. There was, it's the one you see as you go out MacArthur and you can see the bridges. That was built from downtown, and I expect that's where people came. They didn't bother to come out this way. Let's see. Joan put in this thing this wonderful timeline. You'll see a bunch of things she pulled out, and I have some things just I thought where they were kind of funny. She went through all the town journals and pulled out some interesting tidbits. 1906, they reminded people that personal injuries on your sidewalks could be sued for. 1906. 1908, there was a bond issue. Now, we were incorporated in 1906, and the main reason we were incorporated is that people were not taking care of their sidewalks. So in 1908, there was a bond issue, $3,000 to improve walks. 1911, I found the public health report saying that Somerset should stop polluting Little Falls Creek. And it's all written out there, and not only that, but there was a sewage farm on the other side, where we have Grafton Street now, on the other side towards the country club. That was the sewage farm for Chevy Chase. And it, of course, wasn't very efficient, and it was also dumping into Little Falls Creek. That was 1911, they were talking about that. In 1924, the council passed the bond issue for the first street paving. $40,000 to pave the streets. Now, I don't know what was paved. I assume Dorset to some point and Surrey to some point. But don't forget, this is all that existed. So probably went out to Wisconsin. That would make sense. 1924 is when the WSSC finally hooked water up into Somerset. And so the Somerset Water Company was then. And if you note the building of houses, you'll find many, many houses that were built 1924, 1925. That's when things just kind of took off. So all of these houses that you see going down here, now these are old houses, these ones along Surrey. I didn't say much about them, but they were also quite old. But these down here, this was built much later. Let's see what else. The school. All right, so I've done the trolleys. Oh, I want to say something about the Jaffe property, just because it's a very interesting story here. So I've shown you about the water pipe. Jaffe was a dentist. He came in 1918. He bought the Crampton house. So he bought this house, and they lived there. And then they started to build their own house. He had been in Canada. He was fascinated with log houses. And he decided he wanted to build himself a log house. The neighborhood said that log houses did not quite fit in with the neighborhood, and therefore you could not put it on Dorset Avenue, which is why it's set back the way it is. He actually had the logs brought down from Canada on rail cars. He had the people who knew how to build these things brought down from Canada on rail cars, and these are what he built. So you can see he also built this little garage that's on Cumberland. Here's a picture of Jaffe. He was an amateur photographer. He took beautiful pictures. I have a set that Meyer's given me that we might put up here as an exhibit once. He won a lot of awards. Here's one of his pictures. This is my grandfather, who he thought had an interesting face, and he took a lot of pictures of him. So that's the Jaffe house. This is the street paving. So if you look here, Nan Galler gave us these pictures. This is Nan's house right here. This is Big Surrey. This is Dorset. It's not paved yet, but you can see, looking down, what it looked like. They're now trees, you notice, 1925. This is looking the other way, so now we're looking down Dorset. So this is Little Surrey coming in. So we're standing here at the intersection of Little Surrey and Dorset, and we're looking down the hill. It was a big deal in Somerset. They had a carnival, they had a play, everyone got all dressed up. It was just a big, big deal. So that's the street paving. This is the school. So the school was built. What happened before the school, the kids had to walk to E.V. Brown. Now, E.V. Brown was where the D.C. library is now on Connecticut Avenue. That's where E.V. Brown was. They had to walk from here all the way over. Now, Grafton Street didn't exist. It was the edge of the sewer farm that they had to walk along to get over there to school. And the women, mostly women in this neighborhood, petitioned for a school. They joined in with Drummond, and also Friendship Heights, because Friendship Heights was not apartment buildings. It was nice houses. And they got the school. They got the county to agree. So in May of 1928, the school board purchased the Callahan Farm, which is where the school is now, for $38,000. They let contracts for $40,000 to build the school and to pay for the furnishings for $40,000. It opened less than 6 months later. There were 128 students in the school. It wasn't quite finished. There were 8 rooms. There was a 25-year-old person named Catherine Bricker who was the principal. This is a picture of Catherine Bricker. She was around for 37 years. My father went to school there the year it opened in 1928. He was her principal. He was my principal. Here is a picture of the original building. This is what it looked like. Here is something that shows how the additions were done over the years and what was changed as it happened. And here's a picture. They did operettas and plays every year. This is 1930, and it was Mother Goose. My father's in that picture somewhere. I think he was the crooked man. We're moving way ahead in years. This is sort of a mixed pile of stuff that I have further down. So that's a group of in front of Bob Balcom's house, which is next to the Gallers, next to the Roses. There were a lot of Model Ts in town. There's a picture of a victory garden. At the top is a picture of a group of people at the White House egg roll and how they're all dressed up. Then there's also a much newer picture of New Somerset there. I don't know how, I guess I didn't have a place to put it. If you go down further, you see the beginnings of New Somerset. So if you look at the picture at the top, what we're doing is we're looking from a house on the north side of Essex Avenue. We're looking towards the south of Essex Avenue. And you can see there was nothing there. There was basically woods. There were fields. The kids had a baseball diamond down there. I remember walking in those woods looking for mistletoe, so it must have been pretty old woods that you could find there. In 1946, they had their first auction. There were 2 separate auctions that were done. You can see the announcement, those auctions. And it was basically sold mostly, there were some private houses, but most of them were sold to groups of builders and speculators who came in. That's why when you walk down through New Somerset, you'll see lots of houses that kind of look the same, because a builder would come in and offer you could do variations. One of the builders is Ken Freeman, and that last one down there has some of the Freeman houses we still have that beautiful hill that you can walk up and see those houses, and people are leaving them untouched. You know, I'd love to have a historic district there, but meanwhile, we have to rely on people keeping those houses the way they were. So those are some of the Ken Freeman houses. There are quite a few if you go around the loop there. Ken Freeman was an architect. He did a lot of things here. He also did houses out. Bradley Hills, is that the name of it? Yeah. Bradley Hills, he did a lot in Bradley Hills. He did modern stuff. And Walter was telling me that when he did his house, he showed him what the plan could be, and then the only thing Walter wanted to change was to put a laundry chute in. So people could customize their houses. But if you walk up that hill, you'll see what people have done. And in the back, there are 2 more recent. I've just got a lot of newspaper articles that I've saved and found over the years. One is about the de-annexation. The other is about our parkland. And in the far back on the green things are just a nice pile of pictures. There's a beautiful picture of Walter and his daughter leading the parade. There's a picture of Tillman, who was our person who took care of all of Somerset for many, many years. There's a picture of the people that basically made the swimming pool happen. So there's the committee for that. There's a picture back there, I think, of the first road race that was run here, when we run it in October. So anyway, just sort of assorted things. I hadn't looked at this in many years. because we not only made it for the 75th, but we then added stuff. This is an incredible story of the whole Bergdahl tract written by Hobart Rowan. It is beautiful. It explains what happened, how it was done, how we got our parkland. I mean, we were supposed to have shopping centers built down there at the corner of Dorset and Wisconsin. And this is how it was fought. So there's a lovely story here. There's also, Walter wrote something for this talking about all kinds of things. Then he wrote an update when we had our 90th, and that's also in here. So there's some neat stuff in here, and along with the old stuff. And with that, I think I've kind of said everything, except, oh, I want to say something about half of this book is the newer stuff, because I've been talking about the really old stuff. There are more pictures in here, there's a little bit, but we need as a community to capture this newer stuff, because Dorothy O'Brien captured a lot of it. Joan and I worked on another set, but we have very little about New Somerset. We have nothing written up about the de-annexation and then what happened there. We had when Somerset School was integrated. That's a neat story. There are just a lot of neat stories here. And so people who like to write, even if you weren't here, find someone who was here. There's still a lot of the people in New Somerset that were original there. They can tell you stories, but we need to start collecting the kind of stories like the Bergdahl tract story that Hobart Rowan wrote up, because in a way, that's the most important stuff for us to collect. It's nice to have more pictures. If anyone has some neat pictures, I'd be happy to copy them and add them to the archive, but what we really need are stories. So do some help. Look at what's in your house. Find if you have pictures. Find out more about your house. We can add all of this. I mean, that's what the web is for, people. So anyway, that's it. Thank you. And now we can have questions and more discussion.
Frank Rich, the New York Times columnist, lived part of his life in Somerset, in New Somerset. And in his book, he mentions that. His father was Frank Rich of Rich's Shoes. And so I recommend that book to all of you.
As you go down here, you have the Starretts, the Nelsons, and the Spencers. The B Lab was right here. That was one other thing I wanted to say about this. You'll find in here a write-up of a lot of the early houses. I did this. My name was Williamson then, but I did this based on a lot of things that Dorothy O'Brien had. But I also did it by interviewing lots and lots of people. I talked this, we're talking 1981 I did this. I talked to Andrew Starrett, who lived in the Starrett house. He delivered papers in the 1920s all over Somerset. The stories he told me were unbelievable. But I have to tell you, when you read about these houses, it's based on gossip, some of it. So.
Anyone else have a question?
Now, did they envision
Hold on,
the original
hold on.
part?
Dan, do you have a question?
Well, right. I mean, when the first old Somerset kind of thing, to the north side of Essex, did they envision these five men then that started it, all of this, and did they name those streets too?
By the five people that founded it. And also was sold in 1899 with all these lots. The second piece is what was incorporated in 1906, and that included all the Bergdahl land and all of this. So that map, basically originally the 211 acres that's on that map and shows it, went all away and included all the Bergdahl land. So there are two different towns. There's Somerset Heights, and then there's the town of Somerset as incorporated in 1906.
If you go down the end of Dorset, Little Falls Parkway was built in around 1960, and they started assembling that in the 40s. And so what was down there? I know that Dorset didn't go through until Kenwood was built, and it was that parkland. Who owned the land that was sold to the park? And I have a request also.
Kenwood petitioned to have Dorset extended by a bridge across the creek. They were building Kenwood in 1928, which of course was not a great time to be starting a new neighborhood. And we protested greatly. We didn't want this to happen because we didn't want the traffic on Dorset Avenue. What a strange thing. But it happened anyway. So what was down there was a creek and woods. There were dairies down there. So this house here, the Phillips house, that was a working dairy. This was also a piece of it. There was a working dairy here, this house. So there were dairies. It was all pasture. And of course, it was the Department of Agriculture in 1899 bought the land, which we know is Norwood Park today. And that was the whole animal research thing. You can see in the Bethesda book, they have a map showing where all the houses, the various barns and things for all the various things were. All that's left now is that big brick building. That was their administration building, and that was shut down in 1935 because of the smell of the animals. People protested.
Paige Whitley and myself and another person have done some research on the neighborhood directly to the Little Falls Parkway and on the River Road. There was an African-American community there for over 100 years. And so we've been digging around and finding information about, there was a Rosenwald school and things like that. So folks who lived here during the 50s, and especially during the integration period, I would love to have a chance to talk to you to find out what your experience and remembrance of that. Yes, the Offutt book is wonderful for this, but I'd like to get some additional stuff besides the people that he talked to.
And David Stern, who lives on Warwick in one of these historic houses, is the great-grandson of Rosenwald. I think you knew that. Are there anybody else?
I live on Greystone at River Road, the first house or the last house in Somerset, whichever way you look at it. That's my house there, those ladies that are dressed like, 1960s clothes. Number 9 in the lower right. It looks very different now. It's white now, and it has a circular drive, but I recognize that's... But anyway, when we moved in about 22 years ago, Otis Barnes lived across the street, and he was one of the original... he was the original owner of the house. And he said that when he bought it from the builder in 1954, I think, River Road, Greystone Street didn't open onto River Road. It was ended there. So do you know when that opened, and was that controversial? Or? I don't know. Oh, okay. I think that's true.
Wouldn't surprise me.
River Road got widened.
Yeah, River Road was only 2 lanes wide back then. So it could be 1961, she says. So it could be a lot of this happened when Little Falls Parkway was built through. So this is the kind of stuff we need to collect because, we've got old Somerset, but we have very little about New Somerset, and we have so many of the people that actually lived here then.
Does anyone else have a question? I wanted to ask Donna if she wanted to talk at all about the Somerset Women's Club and the Somerset Citizens Association, or if anybody else would like to.
Well, I don't know much about them, except the Women's Club is shown planting those trees. They were a big part of Somerset. They did some of these festivals. It was mostly the women's group that got the school. I mean, the kinds of things that happen. I don't know anything about the Citizens Association. But Zola does. I know Zola does.
The Somerset, yeah, sure.
Watch the cord.
What is it?
The Somerset Women's Club.
No, the Somerset, I belong to the Somerset Women's Club. That was a very interesting organization. It was, all the women were home, and it was a rather formal tea that one would have in the house, and the women would get together and discuss their gardens or other things. I think I went to 1 or 2 meetings. Marge Garfield, who lived next door to me, was one of the members and very active in it. But it was also somewhat political. I mean, there were a number of people in that club who were very active in Montgomery County political affairs, and they got a county council to be elected. It had, I'm sorry, I'm rusty on the details, but they worked to get a hospital. They started this suburban hospital. They did the school, which was enormous. So that was a bit, but by the time I got there in 1962, 63, it was more social. I don't remember it being that political, and I didn't join into the activities. The Somerset Citizens Association is the story of the Bergdahl Tract. The town had made a compact with the Somerset builders to get 18 acres of woods between their development, and they had said that it was an apartment house. Even before we moved into the neighborhood, one of the people here invited me to go to a town council meeting. And who was there but the Somerset builders showing their 12-story apartment house? One. And everybody, the town wasn't really for it. It was after that that Mayor Vinton and the council formed this compact for the 18 acres of land that would divide Somerset, the residential, from the 12-story building. And it was thought of as saving the town, because otherwise there was going to be a development of stores and whatever. However, Somerset builders, who were 3 people who had owned that, who had bought the Bergdahl Tract, this area here, through the years changed what they were building. It became 3 apartment buildings with a skating rink, drugstore. There was going to be a big center right on Wisconsin Avenue, and of course the town really fought that. But because the town had a compact that they wouldn't interfere with any of the building of the Somerset builders, a citizens organization began, and Gene Miller was part of that. It was really a sort of an outsider group that was fighting Somerset builders because the town couldn't. It didn't have the support of the town. It was independent of it. And because of that, the Citizens Coordinating Committee began. It involved Chevy Chase Village and Friendship Heights. And it was that organization, really, that kept that development from going haywire. There was a big rift in town because there were people who felt that you had to support the government, who had signed this wonderful treaty with the woods, and then there were these others that said, well, it won't be woods very much if we're going to have these 3, I think there were going to be 3 21-story apartment. At one time, it was a 30-story apartment building. I mean, the Somerset builders really went through gyrations trying to get something going. But it took them a long time, and in the meantime, we had the wood. We had more than the woods. So that was the Somerset Citizens Association.
Also, there was a question about the integration of Somerset, or also the program with Bannockburn and elementary school.
That was Whittier Somerset. This was a school project. Desegregation took place in 1954, but Somerset School really didn't become integrated with this black community that was off River Road. I'm not sure of the date. David, do you know the date when Somerset School actually got integrated?
I think it was in the 50s, because there are stories of people in 1960 having kids who lived in that neighborhood.
60s,
Yeah.
right. No, it was officially the law of the land in 1954, but I don't think it took place I don't think it happened that soon. At any rate, there. Peter has some pictures that you have also. We got here in 1962. He was a second grader, and there were 3 black children in his class. The year before, there was a picture of the kindergarten group, and that had 10 black children in the class. And by the time he was in 3rd grade, he only had 1 black child in the class. So that whole community was sort of pushed out, and they moved up county. Do you know where? Yeah. Well, it ended right, but because of that, it was a lily white school. And there were a bunch of parents who decided that we maybe should have better integration. If we couldn't have people living here, we should have some sort of program going on. Walter Bear, the Shiners, several other parents, we all got together, and I spoke to then the head of the schools in the district, and he said, well, Whittier School in the district would be a good school to talk to. We got together with them and organized a program that went on for 3 years. We met on weekends, and the kids all did projects together. They ate at each other's houses, and there was some kind of social communication. And that was the Whittier Somerset.
I'm Dave Cathan, by the way. I live on Somerset. I live in Somerset. I live on Dorset. There was a neighborhood that it was a triangle of land that was essentially, think of, I forget what the name of the street is, where Ridgewell is on. Take that, Landy Lane, and then take that to basically to where Little Falls Parkway. There was a triangle of land that had about 24 houses, which was an African-American community for 100 years. And it started breaking up because first Little Falls Parkway, they bought the land at the tip of the triangle, which is right there next to Somerset. That took off a whole portion of it. And then when the Kenwood house, the Kenwood condominium was built, that took out the remainder. So that's about the timing that you're talking about. It was around 60 was when Little Falls Parkway was built, and about 66 was when Kenwood House. So that's the reason why there was, the integration, what did happen after 54 went away because there was no more population.
You can see on this map.
You see the church there, don't they? Yes.
Yes, actually, it's exactly. This is this here, in this corner right here, there was a community. And then on the other side of River, where the train track, that's where there was a Rosenwald school. So think about where the radio tower is right now. That exact location was where the school was. And then down closer to the creek and up where Westwood Towers is, and this is an issue that's, by the way, it's being discussed as part of the Equity One development. There was an African-American cemetery that existed right there between the roofing center and Westwood Towers, down to the creek. So I don't want to take up more time. This is what's about Somerset.
But it's related. Okay, are there any more? Okay.
Briefly, a few memories. Warren Vinton, our mayor, was a head of the Public Housing Administration, a predecessor to HUD. When he retired, all he did all day was look through the catalog of federal programs. He found something called open space grants. You're now the beneficiary of it. This whole park, complex, etc., was an open space grant that they got from HUD. Unfortunately, the papers wrote it up as a poverty grant for Chevy Chase to shield us from Saks Fifth Avenue, but it was an open space grant. Secondly, I was head of the PTA at Somerset School, in around 67, 68. I do not remember any African American kids, but we can check on the timing. The reason I was elected president was my wife did such a super job on the book fair that you will not believe it, they will not have women to be presidents. So they picked the poor schnook husband of this gal, and it seems of such a different era. Number three, I was on the town council for 2 years in the mid-'70s, and the fight over Somerset House, and if you want to spend the rest of the evening reading the fine print in those articles, but it was utterly titanic, ending up to the conclusion we are the only municipality on earth that de-annexed $750 million of assessed valuation. I actually was appointed by Mayor Miller to a study commission. We finally concluded, what's the big deal? But we all voted for de-annexation anyway.
And Professor Weiss wanted to point out that houses in New Somerset had covenants that prevented them from being sold to black people, and this was even in the late 40s.
What about the Jews? I mean,
No. They were open. I think that's an interesting thing. The builders of Lower Somerset were Jewish builders. They had built in Silver Spring, and those people who lived in Silver Spring heard about these new houses, and they saw what Ken Freeman was doing, and Mere Creeps, who was a builder, and another person who built a house in Lower Somerset. So that was the story I just heard tonight from Norman, my second oldest son, said that he was talking to the Snows one day, and they mentioned that they had moved into Green Acres, and they hadn't been there very long when some people came to them and said, "You don't really want to live here, do you?" And they didn't know quite what that was, but they found out that it was because they were Jewish. And Green Acres did have a covenant at that time. And Kenwood did, but Somerset did not. and
So the model house on Warwick, I once saw the covenant. That's now the Fatui house. That definitely, I was surprised. It was the model for the new Somerset down there backing to the pool. It had a covenant. Yeah, the coffees, when we found out, the owners, we couldn't believe it. It was definite.
Well, when the builders came, the builders didn't. They built those houses, and well, I'm not saying that there were covenants all around, but when these Jewish builders built, they sold it to people, whoever wanted it. Not necessarily Jewish people.
Okay, well, with that, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I want to thank everyone for telling great stories. Donna, for your excellent presentation. Zola and Joan and Professor Weiss and Chuck Edson